Hi there, Melina here. Before we start the show, I wanted to personally invite you to join my free community of people from around the world just like you who are interested in behavioral economics and behavioral science. It's called the Be Thoughtful Revolution and is a space for networking and conversation regardless of skill level or experience. I post questions and do periodic Q&As live as a conversation within the group. It's also where we keep all the freebies from the Brainy business. If you go to bit.ly/join BETR, it will take you right to where you can join us via Mighty Networks. Again, if you go to bit.ly/join BETR, like Be Thoughtful Revolution, you can be part of that global community and expand your network immediately. Go ahead and join that now. And when you're ready, come back and we'll start the show. I can't wait to connect with you in the Be Thoughtful Revolution. Welcome to episode 201 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. In today's episode, I'm very excited to introduce you to Katelyn Bourgoin of Customer Camp. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to introduce you to Katelyn Bourgoin. As you will hear during our conversation, I met Katelyn via Twitter, where she's been kind enough to tag me many times when people ask for recommendations for people who are using psychology in marketing or business, as well as for podcast recommendations, books, or just as someone to connect with or follow. As you'll hear in our chat, one of the Twitter threads that she included me in got me a slew of followers, well over 500 in its first 24 hours, which is a really significant number for me, given my total number of followers. And it still continues to send me followers on a regular basis. Katelyn also has a phenomenal newsletter that is so engaging, and I just love how well she understands her audience. We'll be talking about that a lot more during the conversation today. She uses reciprocity so well by shining the light on others, and it comes back in a really great way. That's something you hear me talk about on this show often, like with Priscilla McKinney, Manoj Agarwal, and so many others. And before any non-marketers may tune out and say this episode isn't for you, know that creating engaging content that people want to respond to matters for everyone. Whatever your industry, whomever you're communicating with, whatever you want to achieve, people like to work with those they like, as I recently discussed with Brian Ahern when he was on the show. And framing your messages with the recipient in mind is never a bad idea. Katelyn is a marketer and market researcher, so that's the lens of her statements throughout the episode. But I challenge you to consider all the ways this can be useful to you in your life and business. And for anyone with a newsletter or striving to have one, and who has ever been mystified by Twitter, and especially Twitter threads, get ready for some awesome tips and free resources. Before we jump into the episode, I want to be sure you know that there are lots of links to make it easy for you to learn more about related episodes I've already referenced or will in our conversation, to connect with Katelyn and get your hands on some of her awesome resources, as well as links to some great related books and more, all within the show notes for the episode, which are waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/201. Those already on the Brainy Business list got a direct link from me in the email you receive every Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. The freebie for this episode is the first chapter of my award-winning book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. And if you already have the book, in which case, thank you, you'll also be automatically added to the list when you get your copy of the free PDF companion workbook. Both are housed in our free behavioral economics community called the Be Thoughtful Revolution. There's a link to join that global community in those show notes as well. Now let's jump right in. Katelyn Bourgoin, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm such a big fan.
Oh, thank you. I am a fan of yours as well. As our pre-call chat, as tends to happen, went a bit long. So just kind of catching up and getting to talk a little bit. But I would love if you can tell the audience a little bit about you. As I mentioned in the intro, we met via Twitter, and it has blossomed into an ongoing chat and relationship. But, tell the audience a little bit about you and how you found yourselves in the greater behavioral sciences.
Sure. So background on me, I've made a lot of mistakes that have kind of gotten me to where I am today, which is a good place to be, actually. So to make a long story short, I started out in marketing, had a freelance business that I grew into an agency, was working with some pretty cool clients like Target and Holiday Inn and growing our team. And I got this great idea that wouldn't it be way more fun to market our own products as opposed to other people's? And maybe we should design an app and build software, because how hard can that be? Turns out really hard. But I ended up launching a VC-backed tech company, raising funds and, getting lots of kind of press exposure. We were good at that side of things, and learned in the process that while I was good at marketing it, I was really bad at product design and we had not built the right solution. So when after about 3 years of trying our darndest to build a sticky product that people loved, I decided to shut that company down and got approached by actually our lead VCs, and they came and they said, you guys are really good at marketing, and we've got all of these other teams, many of whom are technical teams, who are really good at building product, and maybe you could help some of them and work with them. And I was like, great, because I really need some money because I'm now broke from spending 3 years on a founder's salary. So I ended up working with a bunch of companies and seeing the same problem over and over, which was that they just didn't know who their best customers were or really understand why those customers bought. And that led me to launch the company I run today, which is Customer Camp. And really, in a nutshell, we help marketers to better understand why their customers buy so that they can market smarter. And we do that through teaching customer research methods. And then also one of the ways that we create value for our audience is we share stuff around buyer psychology and behavioral economics. So that's how I came to discover you and get really excited about the work that you're doing. So that's the background in a nutshell.
Yeah. And I think the audience listening is definitely able to hone in on all the reasons why we became fast friends in the, why people buy and customer psychology. And of course, all the things with the marketing background and getting into behavioral sciences. So with that, I guess, you said you kind of got into, behavioral science and started looking around. Do you have any sort of aha moment or anything specifically that got you there that you remember where you got excited or that you started digging in on that was pulling the thread at the sweater, anything like that?
I do. So when I decided that I wanted to focus my business around helping people to better understand their customers, of course, what I did was I was like, well, what are people doing today and why isn't it working? And when I was building my tech company, something that's very common in the startup world is this idea of going off and doing customer discovery and customer development, which is you go off and how I have been taught, you go off and you interview potential buyers and you want to try to understand if they're going to want the thing that you're building. And I did that for my tech company. I went off and I interviewed 300 potential users before we built the product. And I thought that I was doing it right. And in fact, I was completely doing it wrong, which I now know, which is something I try to help people avoid. But I was asking them, talking about our idea, why it should exist in the world, showing them mock-ups, asking what they think. And of course, I was getting really resounding, great feedback. It was like, oh, this is so terrific. And I could use this for this. And I would love this. And all of the things that you want to hear as a founder that in fact is completely detrimental to creating the right solution. And so when I decided that I wanted to help people to overcome that problem, I was like, why are so many people doing customer discovery wrong? And that led me to discover this innovation framework known as Jobs to be Done. And are you familiar with Jobs to be Done? Do you think your audience is familiar with it? Should I give a little intro?
We haven't had anyone talk about it yet on the show, so definitely we should.
So Jobs to be Done, for me, blew my eyes wide open as both a marketer and an innovator. And the idea is really simple. It's we spend all this time as marketers obsessing about understanding our buyers. And we often do that by looking at their attributes, their demographics, their firmographics if we're selling to businesses. And then we talk about their psychographics, like how they think and things like that. But like ultimately, what a lot of that really doesn't matter when it comes to designing the right solutions or marketing more effectively. Like that stuff's valuable, can help you to get in front of the right people, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what you should say to them or when they might be looking for a solution like yours or how you can communicate with them in a way that they understand the value. So when I discovered Jobs to Be Done, it was this different way of thinking about what drives demand. And the basic concept is that we don't really buy products and services. We hire them because we have a specific job we're trying to get done. And when we choose the right product, we're essentially hiring it. And if it works well, if it gets us to the progress we're trying to achieve, then we're going to be satisfied and we're going to keep buying it, maybe tell friends about it. If it's software, we'll subscribe every month. And if it doesn't help us to get the job done, then we'll essentially fire it and look for something new to hire. And so when people hear the word Jobs to Be Done, they think about basically what that just means is the progress you're trying to make in a particular circumstance. So really understanding the context of a customer situation and what would cause them to seek out and choose a new solution, understanding that what made them switch from what they were doing before to what they're doing now. There's just so much insight in that buyer's journey that you can learn as a marketer. So when I discovered Jobs to Be Done, I was like, okay, I as a company, I'm not a customer research business. I'm in the business of helping marketers to understand why people buy so they can market smarter. And one of the ways we do that is by teaching customer research methods. But I thought, okay, so if we're going to come up with some really good content. And, obviously as a marketer, you want to have great content marketing. If I'm going to have a newsletter, what should be the premise of it? Like, should it be about research? Well, no, because research is what we teach in our trainings. And that's where we go really deep. So I wanted it to be something where I knew I'd be attracting the right kind of people, people who were nerdy about understanding customers, people who were passionate about doing things in a methodical, like kind of insight backed way. But I didn't necessarily want to make the focus of the newsletter research. And so I thought, okay, what else? What other ways are there to understand why customers buy at a more high level? And then it was like, well, behavioral psychology, like understanding why we as human beings act the way we do, cognitive biases, heuristics, all that stuff, that could be really interesting and compelling. So for me, it was just like, this is a good introduction for me to attract the kind of people that will be a good fit for the work that we do. And I didn't really expect it to be as popular as it's become, which is a nice surprise. But really it was about understanding, like at a high level, we exist to help people to better understand their buyers. The way that we do that is through educating them on why people buy, through the behavioral economic stuff, through our trainings, through some, products that exist now and some new ones that we're working on. But if in the future, the, new offers come on market, like let's say there's this new amazing eye tracking technology that tells you everything about like where somebody's looking and what's happening in their brain, and it's really affordable and like the average marketing team can afford it. Like maybe I would teach people that because like that's still going to get that job done of helping them to understand why their customers buy. So like I think of that as the outcome that we deliver. And it was really discovering Jobs to Be Done that made that extension make sense to me. Because I think if I wouldn't have known about that, I would have said, okay, well, let's create a newsletter on topic, which is research. But it was thinking beyond research and thinking about, what that outcome was that allowed us to come up with something that really was a bit of a departure from our expertise, but it made sense given our role as a company.
Yeah, I have talked about it a couple times on the show before, and I wrote about it in my second book, which is to be released later this year. But there's a really great article that was in the Harvard Business Review 50 years ago or something when it first came out, but it's called Marketing Myopia. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not, no.
Okay. It's one of my favorites. And there's just a little tiny bit in it. The whole article is great, but there's a little bit he's talking about mission statements. And I was introduced to this when I was doing my undergrad, and they're talking about the people that made buggy whips. So your company makes buggy whips. It's the, early, it's 1904. And you're thinking, your mission statement is that we're going to make the best buggy whips in the world. But if that's your mission and, Henry Ford comes around and people are having automobiles now, you're done, right? You're out. There's nothing left to be done because you were too myopic in that setup that you have for yourself there. Whereas if you realize people only want a buggy whip because a buggy is kind of the only way they know to get anywhere right now. But if there was a better way, they would rather go with that other option, which clearly has been the case. And so if they were to realize they were in the business of making things go or helping you get places, they could then shift when cars come around and go from designing buggy whips to making engines or something along those lines. And same, my professor at that point, I will always remember having said that instead of selling drills, people aren't buying drills, they're buying holes. And that's just the best way to make a hole, right?
That's right. Love it. Right. And this is like Jobs to be Done is built on that. And like, I love that you brought up the idea of transportation, because the thing about Jobs to be Done that I think is so fascinating is like a lot of innovators think in terms of like functionality. And while having a functionally better product is important, there's all of these other factors that you need to consider when you really think about the job holistically. So one of my favorite examples, which you've hit on with transportation, is you think about, that Henry Ford quote. It's actually misattributed to him. If I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Well, Henry Ford never actually said that. There's like no evidence that he said it, but people love to use that as an excuse why they shouldn't do customer research. But that being said, if you go off and actually talk to customers about what struggles they're having with their current solutions, that can help you to design a better one. And so thinking about an innovation that happened, I don't know, probably about 15 years ago now, that should have taken off, that never really did. I always look at the Segway as this great example of like, it was a functionally terrific solution, right? It was less effort exerting than a bike. It was, cheaper than a car, good for like short transit between here and there where you don't want to be walking. Like the Segway was assumed that it was going to be this massive, massive revolution in how people traveled, and it never took off. And the reason is because you have to not just look at the functionality of a product, but you have to consider the social and the emotional aspects too. And you look kind of nerdy on a Segway.
Super nerdy.
You don't look cool on a Segway. And so while all of these people who are probably keen on the functionality were like, yeah, I'm going to get a Segway, it never really hit its stride. And then you look at this huge emergence that's happened just in the last few years with these electric scooters and how those have taken off far, far faster than the Segway ever did. And functionally, there's some like improvements there as well, but you also can look a lot cooler on a scooter than you do on the Segway. So in understanding the job, this is where people kind of get confused. It's not just about designing a product that has better utility. It's about understanding all of the context in which somebody might use that product, all of the solutions that they're using instead, and kind of like the pains that they have with their past solutions, and also like their desire, what I call their selfish desires, which is the stuff that really matters because it drives a lot of our decisions. But a lot of innovators and product designers think way too much about utility and not nearly enough about kind of the emotional and social drivers.
Yeah. Well, knowing, of course, that you have trainings that help people learn this process, do you have a few tips? I know that, looking at those buying triggers or the areas where people tend to get hung up on functionality, like how do you shake it up? How do you help people to do that so they don't just get stuck on the utility of something?
So one of the most amazing research methods that I have discovered, I was very lucky to get to learn from Bob Mesta, who's this incredible innovator, and he's one of the pioneers of Jobs to be Done. He worked with Clayton Christensen on formalizing it and kind of putting all the language around it. And he has this technique that he does. And Bob is dyslexic. And he struggles with reading and writing. And so he likes to do things in this visual way. And so when he was trying to understand buyers for new products that he was trying to sell or ways that he was trying to innovate on products, he would go out and he would use this method of basically getting them to retrace their buying journey. And he would map it all out to a timeline. So it was like, when did you buy the thing? And let's work back to like the very first thought, what I call the trigger that made you realize that you may need a new solution. You may not have known what you were looking for yet, but you knew that something had changed and there was progress that you needed to make and you were feeling some struggle to make it on your own. And so he gets them to walk through their buying journey in exacting detail. And it's in having these conversations and pulling out the details of those conversations and kind of mapping, like when, like, what else did they consider and why wasn't that a fit and who else was involved in the decision and what influence did they have? And like gathering all these details with the buying decision, that's what leads to being able to design better marketing, because you can get in front of people who are more likely to experience these buying triggers. Because, as we know, as marketers, we can get in front of people all we want, but they're just going to ignore us unless they actually have intent and interest in our offer. And it's our job to figure out what's going to get them to have interest in our offer. And so a lot of marketers spend a lot of money and energy trying to get in front of people that are actively searching for solutions like theirs already, which is great, but that's only like 3% of the market. So what about the other 97% of the market that doesn't know to look for a solution like yours, or doesn't realize that the thing that you do might help them? How do you get in front of those people? And so this technique of doing these one-on-one interviews with people who have actually bought a product, as a marketer, for me, nothing has been as effective as helping me to quickly understand an audience as that technique. And it's something that far too few marketers do. It's not necessarily common practice. I'm hoping, as I do the work that I do, that more people will begin to do it. But it's just the insights that come out of it are really, really powerful. So that technique, like just talking to buyers who have bought to try to understand their buying journey. Not ask them what they think about your product. You might touch on that, but it's understanding the whole buying journey, what's happening outside of your funnels, offline. You can't use tracking software to figure it out. That's the stuff that a lot of marketers are missing. And there's so much good stuff there.
Yeah. And ideally, you might find some commonalities between people, like you said, where they had to ask someone else for feedback, or, where they were realizing there was a problem is a point where maybe you could be communicating with them differently as that trigger point, a life change, or, something that happened that you can keep in mind as you go to be messaging to them into the future.
Absolutely. Like I have a Twitter thread where I kind of break down this framework that I developed. So with what I love, like Jobs to Be Done was initially designed with the kind of like innovation world in mind. Because Bob, that was his background. Like if you've ever taken a bite of a Snickers bar and you felt how it kind of like balls up in your mouth and like has that like really satisfying taste, like Bob did that. Like if you've looked at your gas tank and looked to see that there's like a little arrow that shows which side your gas tank is on when you're sitting in your car, Bob created that. Like he's the innovation guy, right? And he knew that this worked for marketing and design and sales as well. That wasn't necessarily his background. But so for me, when I learned this technique, I was like, I can see how this immediately translates to design, like product design, but it's also giving me so much great insight. And as a marketer, I want to know how to pull out the obviously actionable stuff and turn that into like campaign ideas and experiments so that I can test demand with audiences. And so I created a framework that kind of complements Jobs to Be Done, which is called the trigger technique. And we can maybe link to it, like, and people can see the whole details, but like the thing that you can pull out of these conversations around the trigger events that make somebody begin that buying journey. There's like, from a campaign perspective, there's so much cool stuff. Like you can identify when somebody might be most likely to be entering the buying journey, and therefore you can target people that are earlier at the stage. You can figure out other people who might also have similar jobs that they're trying to get done, and how you can then kind of like use that insight to come up with strategies to get in front of people like that. So there's a lot of really great stuff that can come out of these conversations, but oftentimes when people get started, they'll be like, this is a lot. How do I decide what to use and what not to use? Which is why some people are resistant to qualitative research in the first place, because you get so much and you have to kind of parse it and figure out what matters. And so the trigger technique is a good solution for kind of pulling out the bits that you can make most actionable and like sharing those ideas with your team to kind of back up your strategy.
Awesome. Well, we will definitely link to that in the show notes so that everybody can check it out. I bet everybody is clamoring to go find it at this moment. So definitely we will make sure that is linked for everyone there. So there are a couple things too that you mentioned when you have been talking so far that I really, really, really wanted to note about in our conversation today, which I already let you know before we got on the call, so you talked about your newsletter, you talked a little bit about Twitter threads, and I love how you do both of these things. And I think there are areas where most people go wrong. I would say, so on the newsletter front, most people go wrong there in any real content they're creating. I think in that sort of utility problem. And as you know, in marketing has said it as the, features and benefits sort of a deal. And you talk about the, not making it about research. Even as people who love research, a newsletter about research techniques is going to be boring inherently, right? Like we get it. We love it. I know the listeners here are research fans too. That's not something that is going to be super exciting and timely and like you feel compelled to read in the moment it comes out. For the most part, it just won't be. And so finding though, what will be interesting and knowing, like you said, this earlier point in that buying journey, I think is so important. And I want to make a note for everyone listening who's not in marketing. This is not just, marketing for customers, but it's about having compelling information in your intranet. If you're working on things with internal changes or in any other area of life, these are really important tips and things to keep in mind. As you know, and I'm linking to my episode on pricing strategy, that buying is not just, we talk about change management in the same way I talk about pricing. You're still trying to sell people on ideas for them to buy in on. It all comes together. So take these notes and know that it's not just about selling physical products to people. But can you share more about your newsletter? And as I've said, of course, there will be a link to that in the show notes too. I love your newsletter. It's really, really well done. So with that set up, what can you tell us about it?
Well, I would say that when we designed the newsletter, we thought about what was the job of a newsletter. And to your point, like the topic that we speak about and that I'm passionate about is research. Research for most people is not something that's going to get them super pumped every week to open your email. And it's only relevant to them when it's relevant, right? So like I might have a research project this month and then not do another one for 6 months later. So now I'm disengaged, not interested in hearing from you. And so thinking about the question of like, why do people open emails from marketers, right? Like, why do they open emails from subject matter experts? It's because they want to get smarter, right? They want something that's going to feel like a good use of their time where they consume it and they feel it's benefited them in some way. They've been inspired. They have a new idea. They have evidence to support a new approach that they want to take. And so that was kind of the initial foundation. It was like, we want to create a newsletter that makes somebody feel like they've just it's food for their brain. It's like a workout for the brain, but it's got to be fast because nobody has any time, particularly marketers. And marketers have all these different things vying for our attention. And so it's got to be really quick to consume. And it's got to be something where you walk away feeling like, okay, like I have some ideas of how I might apply this to my own work. And so with that in mind, I looked at some other great newsletters that are out there because, of course, as marketers are always seeking inspiration. And I looked at James Clear's newsletter. James Clear is the author of Atomic Habits, great book. A lot of your listeners have probably heard of it. But he has this very simple structure to his newsletter. I think it's called 3-2-1. And it's basically 3 tweets from him. He's an epic tweeter. And what's amazing about James is just a segue. He's all about like being really productive. And so he gives his phone password or his Twitter password to his VA every week. And he doesn't actually get access, like, so that he can get blocked out of it. So because he'll get too addicted. And then he gives them the tweets to send on his behalf. And then at the end, the weekend comes, he gets his password again. He can go in and see what people have said, which is mind blowing to me because like his Twitter is always insane, like blowing up, but he's not even on there that much. But with James, he has like his 3 tweets, oftentimes the ones that have performed the best. So he knows that they're going to resonate with people. He has 2 concepts or ideas to share. And then he has 1, I think, question to kind of get the listener thinking. And his newsletter is wildly popular. And it's popular with the type of people who are interested in self-improvement and who want to be smarter and who are looking for kind of like a cheat sheet in how to do that. So I was like, how do we take the insight there, which is, quick hits of value, and apply that to what we're doing. And so that's what led to the outline we use for our newsletter. So every newsletter is the same format. And it starts with a little story where the person can put themselves in the shoes of the buyer, because of course we are all buyers. So that helps it to be, to resonate in us, to kind of like empathize with that situation. And then we kind of reveal what concept we're going to talk about. So we'll talk about concepts that your listeners would be familiar with, like scarcity, framing, bandwagon effect. And we'll dig into one in detail in each newsletter. And we'll talk about a little bit of the background on it. We don't go heavy into that piece, but we talk a little bit about the kind of background, like if there were particular researchers behind it, who are they, how they come up with it. We'll share a tip to looking inside of the buyer's mind and how this applies when it comes to how buyers are thinking. And then we'll share 3 ideas for how you might be able to apply this to your own work. And that's it. Every newsletter is the same. The promise is that you can learn buyer psychology in 3 minutes a week. And in fact, that's a bit of a lie, because most of the emails are probably more like 4 to 5 minutes to read. They've gotten a little longer over time, but that's the concept. And it's, it really came down to us sitting back and saying, what makes somebody want to open a newsletter and read it? And it's because they need to feel like they're getting something back. And that something can be inspiration. It can be validation that they're doing things right. It can be, something they can forward to a coworker to say, this is why it's important that we do this thing. I didn't know how to communicate it to you before, but here's the evidence that this is like why we're doing this thing. So that's the idea behind the newsletter.
Yeah. And just looking through, so I save them all. And I
love your work so much. So that is
Yay.
Like such a huge compliment.
Thank you. Yeah. And so I have, but they all have, now looking at them, I know it's you when it hits my inbox, and I know why now, where I look at them kind of in mass like this. So it's the topic, brain emoji, why we buy. And then every single week, the same piece. And of course, I know it's you because your name is there, but just seeing it in my subject line, I always know that it's you. And that consistency, I know that for people, it can feel like, oh, it's going to get boring. I have to shake things up all the time. But where I know it's you, even if I don't have time to read it, I have a folder that I can put it into and say, okay, I want to take a look at that when I have some more time.
Can we pause and talk about that for a second? So this is something that we did. I didn't start the newsletter that way. And I had a team member at the time who was helping me with writing them and doing their research. And he was like, I was wanting him to like test different subject lines, because in marketing, you hear all this stuff about like, this line versus this line, and this converted better, and who opened this. And like, you have to make it like really valuable and create curiosity. And he was like, well, maybe we could just keep it really simple and like, just say the name of the newsletter, which is why we buy, and like what the thing is we're exploring. And I was like, no, like, that's not the right path. And then he'd moved on. He got a new opportunity, and I was having a baby, and it didn't make sense for me to keep a big team on at the time. That's another story. But afterwards, I really thought back to what he said, and I was like, I think he's right. Like, I don't think we need to change up the subject line every time. People come to expect the value, then maybe it's actually better to have that consistency. And so we started about, 15 issues ago, 20 issues ago, doing the subject line the same way every time. And then Anne Handley said something in her newsletter the other day that really struck me. And she said, the from line in your email is more important than the subject line in your email. And I was like, that's true. Because this is this whole idea of like, authority and trust. And once somebody's come to recognize that they're expecting value and they're expecting that you're an authority on that topic, like the subject line is less relevant than the fact that you're sending them another email. But that takes a lot of work to get to that point. And for a lot of brands, they want to make sure that they're communicating something really compelling in their subject line. But if you're going to be doing a newsletter like ours, you may not need to worry as much about the subject line being really compelling every time, because the fact that it's coming from you is a signal that really matters.
Right. And it's an interesting thing to try. And I think as, understanding the problem you're solving, testing things out, doing some experimenting for everybody is important, especially, so yours they're very short. And so I can see the full thing there. So I'm looking here and I see price relativity, why we buy, halo effect, why we buy, smell, why we buy, loss aversion, why we buy, right? I can see the whole thing there. And then I can see that it's from you if I had any sort of question as to where it came from. I know what I'm looking at here, and it's easy to get. Even, the longest one being foot in the door technique that I see here. I still get, who it's coming from, and it's something that I'm interested enough in versus, and I play around with subject lines all the time too. And I might test something similar here soon enough. But if you were to start, I think we would feel compelled to have it be where it would say the Brainy business, something, it's Melina Palmer's from, and then it says the Brainy business, and then the topic. I actually, when I first started the podcast, when I was doing my foundations episodes, I was calling them all behavioral economics foundations, loss aversion or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then realizing, wow, that's really dumb. That's a stupid way to do this, because anyone scrolling through a podcast app or something, you only see the first few words or characters. And if they all look exactly the same, that's not helpful. And so they need to be, even just in its simplest form, loss aversion, a behavioral economics foundations episode I did for a while, but testing around, playing with it, seeing what works, and recognizing if someone's going to search, what do they want to find and what's going to be easy for them to say, yes, that's what I'm looking for right now, and I want to go check that out, is really helpful. And like you said, the flow of the newsletters, they always have a good story to them. They pull you in very well. I highly recommend everybody subscribe to Katelyns Newsletter. So there'll be a link and you can check that out. And the other thing that you have to check out that she does such a great job of, and I have been the wealthy benefactor of some of these Twitter threads and wealth of followers that I have gained from when Katelyn has mentioned me in a Twitter thread, is that you just do a really great job with Twitter threads. And I think one, again, where people are not looking at newsletters and content sharing in general, we kind of come from the wrong perspective. I think Twitter and all the socials, people get a little bit freaked out in general and aren't really sure what to do, and therefore end up sharing banal content that just sort of exists and doesn't do much for them. But you do really, really great sharing that helps promote other people. And I love everything about it. So what can you share about, I guess, your Twitter philosophy and how you've had success with Twitter threads? And if you have any thoughts or recommendations for people there.
Absolutely. So what I would say is that what I've discovered over time as a marketer is that when you are a marketing team, a small marketing team, oftentimes the advice you'll get is, you need to go where your customers are. And that's true. But also probably depending on what you're doing, your customers are hanging out in different places. I'm sure I could grow an audience on Instagram if I wanted to, or I could grow an audience on TikTok. There's more and more B2B people are going over to TikTok. Ultimately, I looked at what am I actually good at? And what community has a vibe that I want to interact in. And I tried to grow an audience on Instagram, and it just wasn't my jam. And Twitter, I'm good at. And Twitter, it's funny, I have so much respect for the fact that you can write books. And for me, the idea of writing a book is so audaciously scary because I'm really good at writing really short, little pithy, thoughtful things. And I struggle with long form content. It's not my strength. And so I would say the number one thing is, yes, be where your audience is, but in some cases, unless you're targeting a very niche type of audience, chances are they might be hanging out in different places, right? So then give yourself the break and say, what am I actually good at? What type of thing do I like to do? What am I going to be more you have to be consistent with anything you do on social for it to actually take off, because consistency breeds luck, right? If you keep showing up, eventually you're going to get lucky. Somebody's going to see something you've done. The algorithm's going to pick it up and it's potentially going to go viral. So you have to be that consistent. So number one, choose the place where you think you can be consistent. And for me with Twitter, what I love about Twitter, and I think I just got lucky, and that's quite honestly, just as of today, somebody mentioned me in a thread yesterday, and it's led to over 3,000 new followers. And I posted and I said that this is amazing. I just had a conversation on a podcast interview I did yesterday with somebody, but another mention that happened one time where I got over 10,000 new followers from one person's mention of me. And what's happening with Twitter right now in particular is there's really this kind of big community of marketers that is blossoming there. And there's people who, if you are hanging out on Twitter, you start interacting with the same people, and you're getting to see great stuff that they're working on and getting to know them. It's leading to, for me, opportunities to be guests on podcasts like this one, or opportunities to do guest webinars with brands. And now I've got new sponsors for my newsletter. So like most of what's really happened for my business from a audience growth perspective is led primarily by Twitter. And so it's just like there was timing. There was the fact that this is like something that was, I was comfortable with. I was good at writing tweets, much more so than I was figuring out what to say in front of a video or a camera on Instagram. And I make a big effort to follow the right people who inspire me, who I can learn from, who I can see how they do it and learn from that. And so with Threads, I started to notice probably about a year ago that there were some people that I'd started following that at the time I had a larger following than them, but they really quickly like blew past me and were going super, super fast. And they were writing a lot of threads and they were putting tons of value in these threads. They were almost like they were writing these mini blog posts that were just so good. But it was what I loved of it was this episodic quality where it's like, each tweet had to be written in such a way that kind of got you to want to read the next one and the next one and the next one. And so when I saw these other folks, how they were doing it, I said, okay, maybe I should try to do some of these. And so now I make an effort to try to do one thread a week. Doesn't always happen. And again, it takes me a lot of time. Like I wish I was a faster writer, but I'm just not. Like it can take me like 3 hours to write a thread. And then sometimes that thread will get like very little interest. And then other times I'll have one like the one that's pinned to my Twitter profile that's, led to 2,500 signups for my newsletter when I posted that within a couple of days. So you got to put the consistency in so that you can get lucky. And threads for me, they take they take effort for me to do, but they've definitely resulted in really fast follower growth. And one of the great things that I see lots of people doing with threads, and I do myself, is leverage the opportunity to highlight other work that other people are doing, right? There's so many great people that are producing awesome stuff, and you can write a thread just on curating that stuff and sharing it and celebrating those people. And that helps you to build community, gets reciprocity going between you and them. So threads have been a great driver for me. And I love when I get to use them to highlight what other people are doing that I know that my audience is going to be interested in.
Yeah. Well, and I love that I was going to ask this question, but knowing how long it does take to write content. Yeah, you can go spend, 10 seconds writing a tweet and then go, oh, why didn't I go viral? Right. But really investing the time. And like you said, what I like about threads is that they allow for someone like me who has a contentious relationship with brevity, I shall say, where I strive to say less words and it never works out that well. So that's why even for my books, like I can only do how many words? Oh man, cutting it is the hard part. So being able to recognize that you can make it into more than just the 160 characters or however much it is these days that you can put onto Twitter, and do it in this way that makes people want to keep moving. So actually, I appreciate that this one has been your pinned tweet. So it's one that you did mention me in, and I still get followers. I actually got one just a few hours ago that was from the mention that you had from me. And this tweet was originally from January 5th of this year. So a little over 3 months ago now, when you had that original tweet, it shows, because I'm just for the audience listening, you can go check it out too. I will mention it again, but she's at Kate Bour, Bour. And so the tweet says, I spent 1,500 plus hours learning about cognitive biases and heuristics, aka the stuff that drives your customers to buy. Here are the top 19 concepts that marketers need to know, : And then you kind of go, well, what are they? Right? You go, tell me more about this. And you want to click to open it. And then there are these concepts. Mine was number 9 on the list, and she's mentioning multiple people throughout this 19 concept ongoing thread that's here. At this point, it has over 6,000 likes, almost 300 quoted tweets, 1,700 retweets. And again, it was from 3 months ago, but it's still, providing lots of juice. And for those of us who were mentioned in it, like I said, most of the time now when I get a notification from Twitter, it feels like I open it up and it's someone else liked that or followed me or, something that came from this tweet specifically. And so those threads are really great in helping to showcase other people, to be able to showcase your own knowledge and interest and make them engaging. But it's not easy. You say it's not a, quick little 2-second thing. I'm guessing finding the perfect intro to that would get people to go, okay, I want to know more now. That's getting them curious and excited. Those first 30 words or whatever that made up this intro tweet, I'm sure were not, it wasn't something that you just got through in the first 10 seconds.
That's a great point. What I would say is that when it comes to writing a thread, the first tweet is the most important one. It's just people do say your headline is the most important thing, or the subject line is the most important thing. But when it comes to writing a tweet, unlike, maybe I could get to the point where I would just say, loss aversion plus why we buy. And then somebody's going to read a 30 tweet thread. But that's no, most people are going to scan right by that because it's not going to mean anything to them. So the first tweet really, really matters. If you want to see people who are doing this really, really well, I would follow Dickie Bush. He's one of the co-creators of a program called Ship 30 for 30. And the whole premise of the program is we're going to help you to become a better writer online. And the way you're going to do that is through practice. And you're going to ship something every day for 30 days, whether or not it's perfect. Because most of us get stuck in our perfectionist or, we'll do it later. Or it's a thing we put off till the end of the day. And so his, program's all about helping you to break that. But Dickie goes viral almost every post that he writes, and he teaches different techniques to really create great intros and interest in your online writing. So I would check out what he does for sure. And the other thing that I would recommend to people is I actually got a little document, a template that I made using Coda, which is similar to Notion. If people are more familiar with Notion, on how it's a template to write threads, and it helps in the way that it allows you to kind of get your thoughts all together, and you can write it out and it counts the characters. So how many are in each one. So you don't have to wait and kind of fix it when you go live into Twitter. And if you're going to attach an image, you can make a notes about what that image is and upload it. So if people are interested in that thing, I've got a thread where I write about my Twitter guide. And I mentioned Coda in it. And so if you just do an advanced search on Twitter for Kate Bohr and Coda, you'll probably find that document. And there's no download. You can just go and grab the template right on Coda and see how I do that.
Perfect. And we will make it even easier, and we'll get the link and we'll put it in the show notes.
That would probably be easier.
I believe, and this was, several weeks ago before we even set this up, where I think it was actually probably around that January 5th, the tweet of awesomeness, the thread that, and where I had said, hey, I've already been looking at doing some of these threads and you seem to be doing it pretty well. Where did you determine what you're going to do here and set this up? And so I think you might have sent it to me already, what you're talking about, and I can make sure I'll confirm, and then we'll share with the audience for sure.
Fantastic.
So as we wrap up here, what other insights might you want to share? What little tips or tidbits of anything, advice for listeners, anything that you think is relevant that we didn't get a chance to touch on today?
I think that just the takeaway is that ultimately people are understanding your customers when it comes to figuring out demand is everything. And there's ways you can do that. Doing customer interviews is going to help you to do that. Going out and observing what customers are doing is going to help you to do that. And so what I think I would love people to take away with them is that clarity about what works, it doesn't come from sitting around in a boardroom thinking about it. It comes from actually engaging with customers. So going out and learning from them directly, and then putting stuff in front of them and seeing what works. And that is a process that requires iteration and reps, but like the sooner you can get it in your head, in your team's head, like we're going to focus on really understanding why customers buy, and we're going to test stuff. And it's okay if some things don't work, but we're going to get closer and closer to what does. I think everyone will be better off. I think there's so much pressure on marketers these days to just drive growth as though it's easy. Like we can like flip a switch and like turn it on. And it doesn't work that way. Like you really, really need to understand the audience, and you need to understand demand in a market. And then once you know that, you can apply some of these other behavioral economics concepts to make your work even more compelling. But if you don't really understand your buyers at the get-go, all of this stuff won't necessarily be helpful to you. So it's kind of like you have to do both. It's like both is going to make you a much better marketer. And if you want to market better, really be obsessed about understanding customers.
Yeah. Know who you're talking to, what they care about, where they are, how they're going to be interested in it, and then provide engaging content to help support them on the journey that eventually leads to whatever it is that you're selling.
Exactly. You said that very succinctly.
I'm working on, we're doing a flip here. You had the typical Melina length answer. I went for some Katelyn brevity. We made it happen. All right. And then we will definitely be linking, of course, to the newsletter and the thread about threads in the show notes. Is there anywhere else where people should be going to? Where is it best to connect with you? I'm guessing Twitter being one of those.
If you're not super active on Twitter, of course, come through my website and shoot me an email. But if you really want to make sure that I get back to you fairly quickly, Twitter is where I'm most active.
All right. And what is that website address? customercamp.co, not .com. Perfect. And of course, it'll be in the show notes for everybody. So you don't have to remember. It is just waiting there for you. So thank you so much again, Katelyn, for joining me today. It was delightful to chat with you and learn all about tweets and newsletters and all the good stuff.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again to Katelyn Bourgoin for joining me on the show today. What got your brain buzzing in today's conversation? For me, I really love how Katelyn broke down the jobs to be done framework into her content approach and the brilliance of what she's doing, especially when she took the time to explain the process. It's just fascinating. She's managed to disconnect the work she does for people from the free content she's putting out into the world in a way that's really amazing because they're still so closely related, but not stepping on each other's toes at all. It's really cool. The people who want the market research and training services from her want to know about these aspects of psychology and behavioral science. They're very focused on knowing why people buy, which is why that's a really great name for her newsletter and all the content that she promotes on Twitter. Establishing herself as a thought leader in that space and showcasing her knowledge makes it clear that all that detail will be part of any work she does with or for her clients. They know, like, and trust her and look forward to her emails when they come in. And when they do have a research project, they know who to call. As mentioned, I highly recommend signing up for Katelyns Newsletter, as it is one of my favorites. There's a link for you to do so in the show notes, as well as get that Twitter Threads Coda template for everyone who's interested. And you should absolutely follow her on Twitter. She's at Kate Bour, Katebour, and she definitely shares great content there. Whatever your favorite insight from the episode, will you share it with us on Twitter and tag us both? I will follow back everyone who does so and look forward to engaging with you on Twitter. Both of our handles and everything else you've heard me talking about today are all linked within the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/201 as well. And so, I'm the Brainy Biz on Twitter in case you don't have that handy or aren't looking to pop into those notes right at this moment. And if you enjoy the experience I've provided here for you, will you share about it? That could mean leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you listen, sharing this episode or any other with a friend who you think would find value in the insights, or even hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate it. And you. Thank you again to Katelyn Bourgoin for joining me on the show today. As always, it has been a delight to chat with and learn from you. Next week, join me for another Brainy episode of the Brainy Business Podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.